My husband took me to meet his business partner. Tonight she's yours. He whispered it in Japanese, thinking I wouldn't understand. I didn't react. I didn't blink. I didn't even breathe differently. I just smiled, stood up, and walked to the restroom like nothing had happened. That was the moment my marriage ended. It was a quiet Thursday night in early October, the kind that carried a chill just sharp enough to make the city feel cleaner than it really was. The restaurant Daniel chose sat on the top floor of a glass building downtown, minimalist expensive, the kind of place where conversations were low and calculated, and every plate looked like it belonged in a museum rather than on a table. Daniel had been acting different for weeks. Not better, just more deliberate. Every word measured, every gesture rehearsed. He bought me a black silk dress 3 days before the dinner, something far more expensive than anything he'd ever picked out for me before. He watched me try it on like he was evaluating an investment, not admiring his wife. "Wear this Thursday," he said, adjusting the sleeve slightly. "Keep it elegant, subtle, and be agreeable." Agreeable, that word stayed with me longer than it should have. I didn't argue. I rarely did anymore. Not because I didn't have opinions, but because I had learned over time that Daniel only heard what benefited him. By the time we arrived at the restaurant, the city lights stretched endlessly beneath us, glowing like something alive. Inside, everything was quiet, controlled. Even the staff moved like they were part of a performance. His business partner was already seated when we arrived. "Mr. Takahashi." He stood when we approached, offering a polite bow before extending his hand. Mid-50s, composed with a kind of stillness that made you aware of every movement you made in return. His eyes lingered just a second too long, not inappropriate, but assessing. Daniel introduced me quickly, his tone smooth, confident. I smiled, shook Mr. Takahashi's hand, and took my seat. The conversation started normally. Work, market trends, expansion plans, numbers I had heard Daniel obsess over late at night, pacing the living room while thinking I wasn't paying attention. But something underneath it all felt off. Daniel laughed more than usual, filled Mr. Takahashi's glass before it was even half empty, kept glancing at me not warmly but like he was checking whether I was playing my part correctly. At some point his hand brushed mine under the table, not affectionate, directive. "Drink." I lifted my glass and took a small sip, letting the wine sit on my tongue just long enough to make it believable. Then the shift happened. Mr. Takahashi said something in English about discretion, about trust. Daniel nodded eagerly, then leaned slightly closer to him. His posture changed. Less equal, more compliant. And then they switched languages. Japanese. It had been years since I'd last used it daily, but language doesn't disappear that easily. Not when you've lived inside it. Not when it once shaped how you thought. Daniel knew I had spent time in Japan before we met. He just never cared enough to ask how long, or how well I had learned the language. That was his first mistake. "Kanojo wa konya anata no mono desu. Tonight she's yours." The sentence landed in my mind with perfect clarity. No hesitation, no confusion. I didn't move. Didn't look up, didn't tighten my grip on the glass. I let a second pass, then another. Mr. Takahashi responded calmly, something about expectations, about cooperation. His tone was transactional, clinical. Daniel replied with a small laugh. "She doesn't understand," he said in Japanese. "Just keep her comfortable. She'll follow along." I placed my glass down carefully. The world didn't spin, my chest didn't tighten. There was no sudden rush of emotion, no dramatic collapse. Just silence. A very clear, very precise silence. Because when betrayal crosses a certain line, it doesn't break you. It clarifies everything. I picked up my napkin, dabbed the corner of my lips lightly, and smiled. "I'm sorry," I said in English, my voice soft and steady. "I need to step away for a moment." Daniel barely looked at me. He nodded, distracted, already turning back to Mr. Takahashi. Of course he did. To him, I was no longer part of the conversation. I stood smoothing the fabric of the dress he had chosen for me and walked toward the restroom without rushing, without hesitation. Every step felt deliberate, measured, controlled. Inside the restroom, the lighting was warm, almost flattering. The marble counters reflected a version of me that looked exactly as expected, composed, elegant, untouched. I stood there for a moment staring at my reflection. No tears. No shaking hands. Just a woman who had just heard her husband offer her body like a bargaining chip. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. First I opened the ride app. Then I booked a car. Only after that did I type a message. My stomach isn't feeling well. I'm heading home so I don't ruin your evening. Good luck tonight. I read it once, then sent it. Simple, believable, convenient. Exactly what he would expect from me. By the time I stepped out of the restroom, I didn't return to the table. I walked straight past it. Didn't look at Daniel, didn't acknowledge Mr. Takahashi. If they noticed, they didn't stop me. Or maybe Daniel assumed I was already doing what he wanted, removing myself quietly, making things easier for him. Either way, it didn't matter. The elevator ride down was silent. The city outside felt colder now, sharper, real. When the car pulled up, I got in without looking back. As the building disappeared behind us, I felt something settle inside me, not relief, not pain. Clarity. For 6 years I had adjusted, compromised, explained away things that didn't sit right. His indifference, his subtle control, the way every decision slowly became his. I had mistaken it for personality, for stress, for normal imperfections. But tonight stripped all of that away. This wasn't weakness. This wasn't pressure. This was intention. He hadn't lost his way. He had chosen it. By the time I reached home, the apartment was dark and silent. I didn't turn on all the lights, just one lamp in the living room. I set my phone on the table, slipped off my heels, and sat down slowly. For the first time, I allowed myself to think not emotionally but logically. If a man is willing to offer his wife to another man for a promotion, what else is he willing to do? The question didn't feel dramatic. It felt necessary. I leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling, letting the silence stretch. Somewhere deep down, I already knew the answer. I just hadn't seen the proof yet. But I would. And when I did, I wouldn't ask him for the truth. I would end him with it. The apartment felt unfamiliar that night, not because anything had changed, but because I had. I sat there for a long time after I got home, not moving, not reaching for my phone, not turning on the television. Silence has a way of exposing things you've spent years avoiding. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to fill it. I was listening. Not to the room, but to everything that had been quietly building beneath the surface of my marriage. Daniel had always been careful. That was the word people used when they described him. Thoughtful, strategic, reliable. He never raised his voice, never made scenes, never did anything that would make others question his character. But careful men don't always have good intentions. Sometimes they're just better at hiding them. I stood up eventually and walked slowly through the apartment, letting my hand brush along the back of the sofa, the edge of the dining table, the polished counter in the kitchen. Everything looked exactly the same. The same furniture we had chosen together, the same framed photos, vacations, holidays, curated moments of happiness. All of it suddenly felt staged. I stopped in front of one photo from 3 years ago, Kyoto springtime cherry blossoms behind us. I remembered that trip clearly. It had been my idea. Daniel had gone along with it, but I could tell he never really cared about the place itself. He cared about how it looked, what it said about him. He had told people afterward that it was a beautiful cultural experience. He never once asked me what it meant to go back. I moved on. His office door was closed. That in itself wasn't unusual. Daniel liked boundaries. Work is work, he used to say gently but firmly. It's better if we don't mix things. I used to respect that. Tonight it felt different. I opened the door. The room was neat, almost sterile. His desk was organized, files stacked in perfect alignment, everything exactly where it should be. No clutter, no distraction. Control. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me. For a moment I just stood there taking in the space. This was where he spent most of his time when he was home. This was where decisions were made, calls were taken, deals were shaped. And apparently the plans were built. I walked to the desk and ran my fingers lightly over the surface. Then I opened the first drawer. Office supplies, pens, notebooks, nothing out of place. The second drawer held printed reports, invoices, project summaries. All normal, all expected. But even as I looked through them, I felt something else, something quieter. A pattern. Everything visible was designed to be seen. Which meant whatever mattered most wouldn't be. I crouched slightly and looked toward the lower right drawer.
Locked.
Of course it was. I didn't react immediately. I just stared at it for a few seconds, letting the thought settle. Then I stood, walked out of the office, and went into the hallway closet. The toolbox was exactly where it had always been. Daniel liked being prepared. That included small repairs, adjustments, anything that kept things running smoothly. I pulled out a screwdriver, closed the closet quietly, and returned to the office. Back inside, I shut the door again and knelt in front of the locked drawer. I hesitated. Not because I was afraid of what I might find, but because I knew once I opened it there would be no going back to not knowing. Then again, there hadn't been any going back since the moment I heard his voice at that table. I inserted the screwdriver carefully along the edge of the drawer and applied pressure. The wood creaked slightly. I adjusted the angle, pushed a little harder. A sharp crack broke the silence. The lock gave way. I froze for a second, listening. Nothing. The apartment remained still. I pulled the drawer open slowly. Inside there was only one folder. Black, thick, placed neatly in the center like it belonged there. I reached for it. Even before I opened it, something inside me shifted again, not panic, not fear. Recognition. This was it. I placed the folder on the desk and opened it. The first thing I saw was my name, printed clearly at the top of a document I had never seen before. I frowned slightly and picked it up, scanning the page. A loan agreement. My name, my identification number, my signature at the bottom. Except, I had never signed it. I flipped to the next page. Another loan. Different bank, same structure, same signature. My signature. Perfectly replicated. My fingers tightened slightly around the paper. I set it down carefully and continued. There were multiple documents, financial records, approval confirmations, payment schedules. The numbers weren't small. They were precise, calculated, intentional. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't desperation. This was planning. I turned another page. Copies of my passport, my ID personal documents I had trusted him to handle when we first organized our finances years ago. Every piece of information he needed, neatly compiled. Used. My chest didn't tighten. My hands didn't shake. Instead, something else settled in. Understanding. I continued flipping through the folder until I reached the last document protected inside a clear sleeve. I pulled it out. An insurance policy. My name again. I scanned it quickly. Coverage amount. $500,000. Beneficiary. Daniel. I stopped. For a moment the room felt very quiet. Not heavy, not suffocating. Just still. I lowered the paper slowly. If a man is willing to offer his wife to another man for a promotion, what else is he willing to do? Now I had the answer. Everything. I placed the document back into the sleeve and closed the folder carefully. Then I reached into my pocket and took out my phone. No hesitation this time. I turned on the camera and began taking photos. Every page. Every signature. Every number. Methodical, precise. I didn't rush. When I finished, I uploaded everything to a secure cloud account I rarely used. Then I sent copies to an alternate email one Daniel didn't know existed. Only after I confirmed everything had been backed up did I place the documents back into the folder. Exactly how I had found them. I slid the folder into the drawer, pushed it closed, and adjusted it just enough to hide the damage from the broken lock. Not perfect, but not obvious. Then I stood, looked around the office one last time, and turned off the light. As I walked back into the living room, the silence felt different now. Not empty. Structured. Like the opening move of something larger. I checked the time. 3:42 a.m. Daniel would be home soon. I walked to the bedroom, changed out of the dress, and slipped into bed. When I heard the front door open, I closed my eyes and slowed my breathing. His footsteps were quieter than usual. Careful. He paused at the bedroom door. I could feel him standing there. Watching. Measuring. Trying to decide something. I didn't move. Didn't react. After a few seconds, he stepped inside. The faint scent of alcohol and expensive cologne filled the room. He moved closer. I felt the mattress shift slightly as he leaned in just enough to look at me more closely. I kept my breathing steady, unbothered, unaware. After a moment, he exhaled softly, satisfied. Then he stepped back, changed, and got into bed beside me. He didn't touch me. Didn't speak. Within minutes, his breathing slowed. Sleep. I stared into the darkness. Wide awake. The man lying next to me believed he was in control. He believed I was still the same woman who had left that restaurant quietly without understanding anything. He believed his secrets were safe. And that was exactly why he was going to lose everything. I closed my eyes slowly. Tomorrow I wouldn't confront him. I wouldn't ask questions. I wouldn't give him a chance to lie. Tomorrow, I would start building the case that would destroy him. Morning arrived without ceremony. I woke before Daniel not because I couldn't sleep, but because I didn't want to waste a second of clarity. The apartment was quiet in that early hour, no traffic yet, no movement in the hallway, just the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant rhythm of a city not fully awake. I moved through the kitchen slowly, deliberately. Coffee, toast, the same routine I had followed for years. My hands didn't tremble, my breathing stayed even. If there was any trace of what I had discovered the night before, it didn't show. When Daniel walked in, he paused for a fraction of a second, just long enough for me to notice. He was studying me. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his voice carrying that familiar softness, the one people mistook for care. "Better," I said, offering a small controlled smile. "I'm sorry I left like that last night." His shoulders relaxed slightly. Relief. "No, it's fine," he replied, pouring himself coffee. "I told Takahashi you weren't feeling well. He understood." Of course he did. I nodded, taking a sip of my coffee, watching him over the rim of the cup. "Did everything go okay after I left?" Daniel hesitated for a split second before answering. "Yeah, it went well. The promotion is still on track." Still on track. I held his gaze for just long enough to make it feel natural. That's good. He smiled, not warmly, strategically. "It's a big opportunity." I didn't respond. Instead, I buttered my toast carefully, as if that conversation had no weight at all. We finished breakfast in silence. When he left, I walked him to the door like I always did. A habit built over years, small rituals that made everything look normal from the outside. "Try to rest today," he said, picking up his briefcase. "I will." He leaned in and kissed my cheek. It felt like nothing. When the door closed behind him, the silence returned, but this time it wasn't passive. It was active. I waited. 5 seconds. 10. Then I walked straight to the bedroom, grabbed my coat, and left. The law office sat in a quiet building on the edge of downtown, unremarkable from the outside, which made it perfect. Inside, everything was clean, controlled, efficient. Exactly what I needed. Arturo Vargas didn't waste time with pleasantries. He was in his late 40s, composed, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who listened without interrupting but didn't miss anything. I placed my phone on his desk and slid it toward him. "Everything you need is in there," I said. He didn't ask questions immediately. He opened the files, scrolled slowly, methodically. Loan agreements. Forged signatures. Insurance policy. Each document changed his expression subtly but noticeably. When he finished, he set the phone down and leaned back slightly. "This isn't just a divorce case," he said, his tone even. "This is fraud, identity theft, possibly premeditated financial exploitation." I nodded. "There's more," I added. "He offered me to his business partner last night, in exchange for a promotion." That made him pause. "Do you have proof of that?" "Not yet." He held my gaze for a moment, assessing. "Then that's where we start," he said. "Because right now everything you've shown me proves financial crime, but if we can establish coercion, intent, and a pattern of behavior, we don't just end his career." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "We destroy him," I said quietly. Arturo didn't react to the word, he simply nodded once. "To do that," he continued, "we need something he can't deny, a confession, or a recorded statement that clearly establishes what happened." I leaned forward slightly. "I can get that." The message took less than a minute to write. "Mr. Takahashi, this is Emily. I'd like to speak with you privately about last night. It concerns Daniel's promotion. Tomorrow 10 a.m. Riverside Hotel Cafe. Please don't tell him." I read it once, then sent it. Arrogant men rarely ignore opportunities that benefit them. I didn't have to wait long. His reply came within 20 minutes. Understood, I'll be there. Simple, direct, predictable. The next step required more than just evidence. It required context, patterns. And that meant finding someone else. Lucia was the only person I trusted enough to ask for help. She worked in HR, different company, but close enough to understand how these systems operated, how people like Daniel and Takahashi moved through them. When I told her what I needed, she didn't hesitate. If he's done this before, she said, there will be someone who didn't stay quiet. 3 hours later, she called me back. There's a name, she said. Former assistant, left abruptly 8 months ago. No official reason, no follow-up. Do you have her contact? A pause. Yes. Elena lived in a small apartment on the outskirts of the city. The building was older, worn, the kind of place people ended up in when they needed to disappear quietly. When she opened the door, she looked surprised, then cautious. I'm not interested, she said immediately, starting to close it. My husband is Daniel, I said. That stopped her. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she opened the door again. What do you want? She asked. The truth, I said. She studied me for a long second, searching, weighing. Then she stepped aside. 5 minutes, she said. Inside, the apartment was sparse, clean but empty in a way that suggested something had been taken from it, not physically but emotionally. She didn't sit. Neither did I. What did he tell you? She asked. Nothing, I replied. I found everything myself. Her expression changed slightly. Then you already know, she said. Not everything. Silence stretched between us. Then she exhaled her shoulders, dropping just enough to show the weight she had been carrying. He didn't just cover for Takahashi, she said quietly. He helped him. I didn't interrupt. He arranged meetings, set things up, made sure no one asked questions afterward. Her voice tightened slightly. When I tried to report it, Daniel was the one who handled it. How? He made me sign a confidentiality agreement, threatened legal action, said no one would believe me. She laughed softly without humor. He was right. I held her gaze. What if that changes? I asked. She frowned slightly. What do you mean? What if you don't have to stay quiet anymore? She hesitated. Then slowly, what are you planning? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a small recording device on the table. Her eyes dropped to it. Then back to me. I'm planning, I said calmly, to make them say it themselves. For the first time since I walked in, Elena didn't look afraid. She looked hopeful. And that was enough. Because now I didn't just have evidence. I had a witness. And the moment the truth has a voice, it becomes impossible to bury. By the time I left Elena's apartment, the plan was no longer an idea. It had structure, sequence, risk. That was the part most people misunderstand about revenge. It isn't anger. Anger is loud, unstable, easy to see coming. What works is something quieter, something that looks like compliance until it's too late to stop. I didn't need Daniel to confess. I needed him to believe he was still in control. That evening when he came home, I was already in the kitchen. Dinner was simple, familiar. The kind of meal I had made countless times before, nothing that would raise suspicion, nothing that would suggest anything had changed. He loosened his tie as he walked in, setting his briefcase down by the door. You're feeling better? He said, glancing at me. I am, I replied, plating the food. I didn't want to make last night a bigger issue than it already was. That earned me a small nod. Approval. We sat down together. Ate in relative silence. The rhythm of it all was so normal, it almost felt like a different life one where I didn't know what I knew. Mr. Takahashi seemed understanding, I added casually, not looking at him. He is, Daniel said. He values loyalty. I let that sit for a moment before asking, do you think I made a bad impression? That was the first real test. Daniel looked up, surprised, not by the question but by the direction of it. No, he said slowly. You were fine. I tilted my head slightly, just fine. A pause. Then he leaned back in his chair, studying me again. Why are you asking? I met his gaze, letting a trace of uncertainty show just enough to feel believable. I don't know, I said. It just felt like I didn't understand everything that was happening. He watched me carefully, measuring, calculating. Then he smiled, a subtle shift, but I saw it clearly. He had made a decision. That's because you don't need to, he said gently. Some things are better handled directly. Directly. I lowered my eyes, nodding as if that made sense. And just like that, he stepped deeper into the role I needed him to play. The next morning I dressed carefully. Nothing extravagant, nothing that would draw attention, just enough to match the setting. The recording device sat hidden inside my bag, secured in place. I checked it twice before leaving. Not because I was nervous, but because details matter when everything depends on precision. The Riverside Hotel Cafe was quiet at that hour. A few early meetings, low conversations, the soft clink of porcelain against glass. I arrived 10 minutes early, sat near the window, ordered coffee, and waited. When Mr. Takahashi walked in, he spotted me immediately. His posture remained composed, his expression neutral, but there was something else beneath it now. Expectation. He believed he knew why I was there. That was his second mistake. "Mrs. Carter," he said, taking the seat across from me. "Thank you for coming," I replied. He nodded once. "You said this was about your husband." "It is." I let a small pause settle between us before continuing. "He's under a lot of pressure," I said quietly. "The promotion means everything to him." Takahashi didn't respond. He simply watched me. Waiting. "I think I may have misunderstood what was expected of me last night," I added. That got his attention. Not visibly, but I saw it in the way his gaze sharpened. "And now?" he asked. I lowered my voice slightly. "Now I want to understand properly." He leaned back just enough to study me more openly. "You're a perceptive woman," he said. "Most people prefer not to ask questions." "I'm not most people." Another pause. Then slowly he leaned forward. "In business," he said, "there are arrangements. Your husband understands this." I didn't interrupt. "Success often requires cooperation," he continued. "Discretion, mutual benefit." "And me?" I asked. His eyes didn't leave mine. "You are part of that equation." The words were calm, controlled. But there was no ambiguity. I let a breath pass before asking the question I needed on record. "What exactly does that mean?" That was the moment. The shift. Takahashi held my gaze for a second longer than necessary. Then he spoke clearly, deliberately. "It means that if you and I reach an understanding, your husband's future becomes very secure." There it was. Not hidden, not implied. Stated. I nodded slowly as if processing it. "And if I don't?" His expression didn't change. "Then he may find that opportunities disappear." Silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. Not tense. Just final. I picked up my coffee, took a small sip, then set it down carefully. "I see," I said. He waited, expecting a response, a decision. Instead, I reached for my bag. For a fraction of a second, something shifted in his expression, uncertainty perhaps. Too late. "I appreciate the clarification," I said, calmly standing up. "That's exactly what I needed." He frowned slightly. "Mrs. Carter?" But I was already walking away. No hesitation. No explanation. Because the conversation wasn't meant to continue. It was meant to end. Outside, the air felt sharper than it had the day before. I didn't rush. Didn't check my phone. Didn't look back. I walked straight to the car, waiting at the curb, got in, and closed the door quietly behind me. Only then did I reach into my bag and stop the recording. The small red light disappeared. For a moment, I just held the device in my hand. Not as proof. Not as leverage. But as confirmation. They had said it themselves. Exactly what I needed. By the time I reached Arturo's office, he was already waiting. I placed the recorder on his desk without a word. He played it once, then again. When he finished, he didn't speak immediately. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. "Well," he said finally, "that's definitive." I nodded. "It's enough?" I asked. He met my gaze. "It's more than enough." For the first time since this began, something shifted, not in my expression, not in my posture, but somewhere deeper. Not relief. Not satisfaction. Just readiness. "Then we proceed," I said. Arturo gave a small approving nod. "Yes," he replied. "Now we proceed." That night, Daniel came home later than usual. When he walked into the living room, I was already there. Waiting. Not for a conversation. Not for answers. But for the final phase to begin. He smiled when he saw me, confident, relaxed, unaware. "How was your day?" he asked. I returned the smile. "Productive," I said. And for the first time since I met him, I meant it. Because everything was in place. The evidence. The witness. The confession. All that remained now was timing. And when it came. He wouldn't see it coming. The boardroom was on the 32nd floor. Glass walls, polished steel, a long table designed to make decisions feel inevitable. I had been there once before years ago when Daniel first joined the company. Back then I remembered thinking how controlled everything felt, how carefully power was displayed without ever being spoken out loud. Today it felt different. Today it felt like a stage. The meeting had already started when I arrived. Through the glass I could see Daniel seated near the front, posture straight, expression composed, confident, prepared. Everything about him suggested a man who believed his future was already secured. At the head of the table sat Takahashi. Calm, unmoved, speaking in measured tones about leadership, trust, long-term vision. Words. Just words. I didn't knock. Arturo pushed the door open and the sound cut through the room more sharply than any raised voice ever could. Every head turned. Daniel's reaction came half a second later, his body stiffening, his face losing color faster than I had ever seen. "Emily," he said, rising halfway from his chair, "what are you doing here?" I didn't answer him. I walked in, steady, controlled, each step deliberate. Elena followed beside me, quieter but present. Arturo moved ahead, placing his briefcase on the table with a soft, precise click. The room held its breath. "Mr. Takahashi," I said calmly, meeting his eyes, "you were speaking about trust." A flicker of irritation crossed his face. "This is a private meeting." "Yes," Arturo said, opening his case, "which is why what we're about to present is particularly relevant." Daniel stepped forward, now urgency creeping into his voice. "This isn't appropriate. If there's something you want to discuss." I turned to him. For the first time since that night, I let him see my eyes fully. Not anger. Not pain. Just clarity. "It's already been discussed," I said quietly. That stopped him. Arturo connected his device to the room's audio system with practiced efficiency. A small screen lit up. A soft hum filled the space. "No need to call security," he added calmly. "We'll be finished shortly." Takahashi leaned back slightly, his expression tightening. "Whatever this is." "Let's listen," I said. Then I pressed play. The room filled with his own voice. Clear, controlled, undeniable. "In business there are arrangements." A murmur rippled through the table. Daniel's face went still. "Your husband understands this." Another shift. Subtle but visible. "You are part of that equation." Someone at the far end of the table leaned forward, frowning. The recording continued. "It means that if you and I reach an understanding, your husband's future becomes very secure." Silence. Not the polite kind. The heavy kind. The kind that lands and doesn't lift. I stopped the recording. No one spoke. For a moment, the room didn't move. Then everything changed at once. "That's out of context," Takahashi said, sharply rising to his feet. "You're manipulating." "Am I asked. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Arturo stepped forward, placing a set of documents on the table, neatly organized, clearly labeled. "While we're discussing context," he said, "these may help. Loan agreements, signature analyses, insurance policy." Each page slid across the table toward different members of the board. I watched as they read, watched as their expressions shifted. Confusion. Recognition. Then something closer to anger. "This is fraud," one of them said under his breath. Daniel shook his head immediately. "No, those aren't." "They're your wife's signatures," Arturo said calmly. "Replicated without consent, verified by a forensic specialist." Daniel's voice rose now. "This is ridiculous. She's twisting." "Stop." The word came from Elena. Soft. But it cut through everything. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward slowly, her hands steady despite everything that had once been taken from her. "My name is Elena Morales," she said. "I worked under Mr. Takahashi 8 months ago." Takahashi's expression hardened. "You signed a confidentiality agreement," he said. "I was forced to," she replied. Her voice didn't break. I reported what happened. Mr. Carter handled the complaint. She glanced briefly at Daniel. He made sure it disappeared. Daniel took a step back. Just one. But it was enough. Because now the room wasn't looking at me anymore. They were looking at him. At both of them. The image they had built, the careful, polished version of themselves, was cracking. And it wasn't subtle. It was visible. Security, someone said quietly but firmly. Takahashi's composure slipped for the first time. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, another voice replied, colder this time. And so will the authorities. Daniel's breathing had changed. Shorter. Uneven. He looked at me again, really looked this time. Not as an asset. Not as something to manage. But as something he no longer recognized. Emily, he said, his voice lower now, we can fix this. I held his gaze. For a moment I considered all the versions of that sentence I had accepted over the years. All the times I had believed things could be repaired. Adjusted. Improved. Then I shook my head once. No, I said, we can't. Because this wasn't something that had broken. This was something